On today's episode, we're taking a look back at the somewhat obscure modern western, Lonely Are the Brave.
Understanding? Just how long is that supposed to take? I've only been married 7 years, you know, Jack.
Yeah, but basically you're still an Easterner.
What are you talking about, Jack?
Oh, you didn't understand. A Westerner likes open country. That means he's got to hate fences, and the more fences there are, the more he hates them.
I never heard such nonsense in my life.
It's true, though. You ever notice how many fences are getting to be? The signs they got on them. No hunting, no hiking, no admission, no trespass. Private property, closed area. Start moving, go away, get lost, drop dead. Know what I mean?
I don't even want to know.
While Lonely Are the Brave is set in New Mexico, we're going to hang out here in the Pacific Northwest for a few minutes. Our guest today is Lise Raven, and she's attending the Seattle International Film Festival with her feature film Kinderwald. Kinderwald screens Thursday, May 29th at 9:30 p.m., and then again on Friday, May 30th at 4 p.m. at Seattle's Uptown Cinema. Lisa's first feature film, Low, was one of the founding Slamdance Film Festival films, after which she wrote and directed 3 films for the Showtime cable network. In 2000, Lise moved to Berlin, Germany, after being awarded the DAAD Berliner Künstlerprogramm Artist Residency in Film. While in Europe, Lisa's feature film project, Snipe, received development funding from the Irish Film Board. Kinderwald premiered in June 2013 at the Munich International Film Festival and was chosen as the closing night film at the 2014 Slamdance Film Festival. Welcome to the show, Lise.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Yeah. So tell me about Kinderwald.
Kinderwald is set entirely outdoors. We filmed in September of 2012 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's a story of what happens when 2 German immigrant children disappear into the woods. It's in the mid-1850s, and it's kind of the inverse of Hansel and Gretel in that we don't follow the story of what happens to the children, but we stay with the parents, the community, and it's the fallout from that.
And is there a witch?
There, you know, there are elements that are unexplained. Mm-hmm. So it's not a film that tells you what you're going to see and then shows it to you and then explains to you what you just saw.
Right.
So there's a lot of room for the audience to watch and decide what happened themselves. They'll give you a lot of information, but it's more, the way I wanted to make it was a film where you are out there in the wild with the people and very much experiencing the conditions that they live in.
Okay. I saw the trailer yesterday. It kind of had a Picnic at Hanging Rock vibe.
Oh, thank you. You know, that's another film that I respect so much, and I think was absolutely one of the strong influences or inspirations for Kinderwald. Oh. Yeah, I'm a huge Peter Weir fan. So both Picnic at Hanging Rock and The Last Wave were films that they both rocked my world. And, you know, this was a way of telling a story that I hadn't experienced before when I saw those films.
Right. Film is in German?
The first 20 minutes are in German, and the rest is in English. So before the children, without giving too much away, before the children disappear, the family, who are German immigrants, speak German between each other. And there are subtitles. And there's not a lot of dialogue. This was a time when people didn't chatter.
Yeah.
You know, mindlessly. People said what they had to say.
Hey, so where'd you come up with the idea for this? Because you wrote it as well, right? Yeah,
I co-wrote it with Frank Bruckner, who's also the lead actor. And it's the second in a trilogy of films called the Kinderwald Trilogy. It's 3 films that are inspired by fairy tales about children lost in the woods. So the first was a short, which is called Neighbors, which was inspired by Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. But again, is more geared towards the 3 Bears than Goldilocks. And this second one, the feature, Kinderwald, is inspired by Hansel and Gretel, and then again, you know, looks through the other end of the binoculars. And we're not sure yet what the third one is. I have an idea for a Rapunzel themed film or inspired that would take place in Lisbon, but it isn't about children lost in the woods. So we'll hold off. We'll see what happens. You know, when you finish a film, there's a few years where you really have to follow the film and take it out there and launch it. So at the moment, the next thing I'm going to do is actually a book that I'm translating to the screen, and it's set on the Oregon coast. And it, oddly enough, is another story set in the 1850s about a man that travels down the coast with a group of Native Americans.
All right, so that one's also set, you said, in the 1800s.
Yeah, and oddly enough, I don't like period films.
Yeah.
I really, I kind of call them dress-up films, but as it happens, the stories that I'm interested in telling right now are about big open space, and oddly enough, Low was, although it was set in New York City, was very much about big open space as well, visually, the film I did a number of years ago. So I think I just fell in love with this book many years ago, and then the opportunity came up to get the rights, and so I'm working on opening it up into a film.
Nice.
And I love the Oregon coast. I lived there for a long time, and I've wanted to film there for many years. So this was kind of the perfect mash of two things.
Yeah.
The big outdoors and the Oregon coast. And then again, like similar to the film we're going to talk about today, a story about a restless man who connects more with the land than with settling down.
Right. Well, that's a beautiful transition. So let me just summarize what's going on there. Released in 1962, Lonely Are the Brave was directed by David Miller from a script by Dalton Trumbo. The film stars Kirk Douglas as one of the last cowboys. When he discovers that his old friend Jeff is in jail, he gets into a brawl to get arrested so he can help Jeff escape. Jeff declines the invitation, but Douglas doesn't plan to stick around, so he makes his way out of jail, and during the second half of the film, he's pursued by a sympathetic sheriff played by Walter Matthau. The question then becomes, will Kirk Douglas make it across the border and escape before Matthau can catch him? So I had heard of this film, but never seen it, and when I started to research this, discovered a lot of directors love this movie. So why did you pick this?
You know what? I picked this not because it's not because of cinema studies, not because of anything related to an intellectual approach, but as a child, I saw it on television. You know, I must have been sick one afternoon, or it might have been on TV on the weekend. And after that, I would cut school and pretend I was sick in order to watch it. Because really I loved it.
Yeah.
And I was a child. I was probably 9 or 10 years old when I saw it. And it stirred something in me that I wanted to be Kirk Douglas. That's who I wanted to be. More than that, I saw a number of films at about that age. I saw Walkabout, which is a Nick Roeg film, again set out in the wilderness of Australia, and I saw this film, and they were the first films that I saw that were about things that were more complex than I understood. And they moved me in a way that I wanted to go back and feel those things more and more. Mm-hmm. And I think that is something that I've tried to experience in my own films and in my own filmmaking. You know, I make a film that moves me. I make it, and I consider moments done when they hit me in the right way.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a kind of intellectual way of looking at it. But I loved this film. This was a guy who did things his way, you know. I mean, he says, do what you want to do and to hell with everybody else. Mm-hmm. You know, he's a rebel.
Right.
He doesn't want to settle down. There's a female character played by Gena Rowlands who's the homemaker that he loves. She's the wife of his friend. It's a kind of similar relationship that I later recognized in The Searchers. Mm-hmm. John Wayne's character, Ethan Edwards, has a romantic feeling for his brother's wife, yet it's unfulfilled.
Right.
And his brother has chosen to stay home with this woman and give her what she needs, which is a family and stability, or as Kirk Douglas's character Jack says, they're talking just before he leaves to run, for the final half of the film, and Jerry, who is Gena Rowlands' character, and she does an incredible job in the film, but I never wanted to be her. But she, they're talking about why they never got together, and she says, "You wanted too much," and he says, "No, I didn't want enough. I didn't want a house. I didn't want all those pots and pans. I didn't want anything but you."
Yeah.
And that was so romantic to me, the idea that it's you and your horse, and you're just out there, and the land is yours to explore, and you don't have to go to school, and you don't have to follow the rules, and you don't have to live a life of pots and pans and being a wife or being a husband, or you're free. And that was so intoxicating to me. And I think many of my characters, as I've gone on to make films and tell stories, have been those kind of people who may not have fit in with society,
right?
But they were doing what they had to do to live the way they had to, and not only did they risk a lot, but they left a lot that they might have enjoyed. Mm-hmm. And I myself, my own story, I left home very young, and I hitchhiked around the United States for years and years, and I was a traveler and an adventurer, and took strange jobs, working on the railroad and planting trees and working in fishing canneries, and all kinds of amazing adventures, and I think very much my own way of living in that time in my life sprang out of movies like this that influenced me. These characters, no matter what end they came to in the story, they were living these romantic lives, these Peter Pan lives. And there's even lines in the film about that. It's when he gets into prison to talk to his friend, and his friend won't leave prison with him.
Right.
And
that's Gena Rowlands' husband.
And Kirk Douglas's character Jack says, "You grew up on me, didn't you?" And he says, Gena Rowlands' husband's character says, "No, Jack, I just changed." Mm-hmm. And Kirk Douglas says, "That's what I mean, you changed, and that's Peter Pan."
Yeah.
That's Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. And I think as film directors and people who work in the film industry, we are living these Peter Pan lives, and I don't mean irresponsible, but we get to play make-believe.
Yeah, it's a sandbox. Our life is a giant sandbox, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I produced Kinderwald as well as directed it and co-wrote it, and so there was a very deep level of that non-Peter Pan, but the Wendy jobs, like producing is incredibly responsible work, and yet at the same time I was then free to be the Peter Pan also, and direct and play make believe, and create these unbelievable imagination worlds, and I think that's perhaps moving into directing is another way of being those characters that are like Jack Burns, restless and always wanting to be exploring and traveling, not tied down.
That's a good analysis. I definitely can relate to that. I started a director's workshop here in town. Just it's called the Focus Ring, and it's just purely to work with actors, because I found myself at a point where I was getting ready to make a movie, and it's like, well, I know what the camera does. I know how to cut two images together. But like the one thing I really didn't know how to do is communicate with actors. So we started this group, and
I love working with actors. I really do. All the actors in Kinderwald, aside from Frank Bruckner and Emily Baer, who are Germans and friends, and people who the film was written for them as the leads, but all the other actors in the film are theater actors that we knew from Philadelphia and that I'd seen work and that I'd experienced live, sitting in the audience, experiencing them work on stage and having a gut reaction to their live work. And I love that what an actor brings to the stage is what I want them to bring to a film.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Something
where they're discovering it in the moment. And rehearsal and actual production time are my favorite times, my absolute favorite times.
Do you get a lot of rehearsals?
It's interesting. What I do when I rehearse is I meet with the actors and talk about their characters and their relationships. And, it's kind of that Mike Lee approach of who are you deep, really deep? What, I want you to know everything about your character. I want to know how you met the other characters, and I want to know the breadth of your relationship with them and the experiences that you've had. And then when we go to the text and when we're on set and doing that kind of, bringing it to life, you will understand what to do because you've got a very deep three-dimensional sense of this person. And that to me is rehearsal. Mm-hmm. Sitting, the bad guys in the film in Kinderwald are two really wonderful actors, Brian McCann and Doug Green. And we met a couple of times and just sat for hours at a bar drinking whiskey and talking about their characters and the pathologies and the psychologies. And we never rehearsed lines, but they understood how these characters felt about each other and the interdependencies and the history so deeply that I really would like to make a prequel to Kinderwald with those characters. And but what we talked about was not anything that was in the script, but to me it deeply informed how they were around each other. And that is what's on the screen. How they look at each other. How their impulses towards each other. And those kind of things add something that the audience may not understand, but they get it. They get that there's something there.
We're going to take a little break, but when we come back, I want to talk about the performances in Lonely Are the Brave.
Great.
It's funny, when I asked you about this movie, you actually said, it's a pretty obscure film, you're probably not going to be able to find it, but we here in Seattle are lucky because we have the greatest video store in town. It is Scarecrow Video. It's the largest independent video store in the country, located in Seattle's beautiful University District. It's one of the last remaining brick-and-mortar stores featuring DVDs, VHS, Laserdisc, and Blu-ray. If you can't find a movie at Scarecrow, it probably hasn't been made yet. For more information, visit scarecrowvideo.com.
Now, why'd you throw that bottle? I never saw you before in my life. Try and watch it, huh? You sure you got the right fellow? We haven't even been introduced. My name's Burns. Salud.
Let's talk about the performances in Lonely Are the Brave. I thought that Kirk Douglas is one of those guys. I think he's such an underrated actor. Actually, him and Matthau. Those guys, when you watch them, it feels like you're watching just two dudes, you know? Henry Fonda's another one of those guys, I think, that kind of tends to slip under the radar. They're legends now, but they really just are. They're very casual in their performance, and I love the scene where Kirk Douglas goes into the bar to start a fight.
Yeah, with a one-armed guy.
He gets into a fight with a one-armed man, and it's so great because they all make him fight with his one arm. And there's just bits where, I'm not sure exactly what happens, so he trips.
He trips, accidentally over the guy's foot.
Right.
And then the guy has...
he starts throwing...
He throws a glass and a whiskey bottle, and it's like the guy has a real hard-on for him and wants to fight him. Yeah. And he doesn't want to fight him. And then a very interesting thing happens, and I think this very much comes out of Dalton Trumbo's script. the man says that he lost his arm in Okinawa. What did you do?
Right.
And Kirk Douglas's character says nothing. He doesn't say nothing. He says, I didn't do anything, which is, this film was made in the early 60s. It says something about those who went to war and those who didn't. And Dalton Trumbo also wrote Johnny Got His Gun, which is a very, very powerful, I hate to use that word 300 times, but a very disturbing and powerful film about a veteran who comes home and is almost completely disabled.
Right.
And it's interesting, Dalton Trumbo has a very big history and was blacklisted.
Right.
And wrote under assumed names. But there are a lot of political messages in this film. But that was just an interesting moment, where they find a way to make a very small political point in the midst of something. And if you get it, you get it. And if you don't, you don't. Certainly at 10 years old, I didn't get it.
Yeah.
But, Kirk Douglas was doing the Gary Cooper thing. He was the strong, silent, honorable man. He didn't want to fight a one-armed guy.
Right.
That would have been, dishonest.
Sure. But then there's a great bit that happens right after that, where they book him at the police station, and then he thinks, great, I'm going to jail, I can meet my buddy. And then they look at his record, and basically they're like, you're fine. They send him back out on the street, and then he punches one of the cops, and they get into an altercation. And what I loved about that scene was that the director held on the what do you call it, the booking sergeant.
Yeah.
And you hear the scuffle. You don't see it, but you hear it, and he just casually goes about his business, filling it, cataloging, the contents of his pockets. And
something happened just before that moment. Again, I have to say, this interesting statement, which the film is a very big statement about many things, because it opens, with Kirk Douglas, the cowboy, lying next to the fire in the morning, waking up.
Opening.
And then you hear a jet going overhead. His horse is there, he's there. You think it's a Western, and then all of a sudden you have this disconnect because there's a jet going overhead. And you realize there's something else is going on. And then almost immediately they encounter a fence. But in that scene, in the booking scene, Kirk Douglas doesn't carry any ID. He says, I don't need a card to tell me who I am. I know who I am. So again, it's the dawn of the information age versus the Old West, where you're a man because that's who you are.
Yeah. Well, so that brings up something I wanted to talk about. That, when movies first started, there was a lot of Westerns going on.
Yeah.
And I think it was kind of like, well, we had just kind of come out of the Old West. And so, you're going back maybe 20, 40 years and sort of like revisiting something that, we were just moving away from. Now it seems like a lot of Westerns are about the West dying. So you've got, this film feels a little bit like it. You've got Unforgiven, you've got Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, and they're all sort of about this, death of the Old West.
Yeah.
And what do you think that is?
Well, I think, I think it was also about a change. This film, I think it's about a different view of masculinity also, very much, because I think that's the Old West represents a lot of things, but I think it's also, when I saw the film, the first time, I don't think I understood that it was about anything like the West ending and modernization. But I did understand this very simple thing, which I've carried with me, which is it's the idea of freedom versus responsibility. And this film was made at the dawn of the 60s. So it was released in 62, which was just at that change where the idea that you didn't have to be the man in the gray flannel suit was about to happen. And so I feel very much that the films that I've brought forward in my life, personally as a filmmaker, were not films that I saw 57 times and knew intimately shot by shot. They were films that I had a deep impression of, or that left me with a feeling or an impression, and I may have seen them once every 10 years, and my impressions may have deepened and become more sophisticated. But overall, I believe that as a filmmaker, I'm referring to or paying homage to my impressions of certain films. For instance, I saw the film The Emigrants, which was a Swedish film, when I was a kid also. And I realized after I made Kinderwald that there were a couple of nods to that film, but I hadn't seen it until after I made Kinderwald. And I think those things were impressions.
Sure.
Rather than direct copying. But I feel like the idea of the promise of adventure and freedom was something that was slowly whittled away at, over the 50s and the 60s and the modern times. We're always in the modern times. I saw something outside of a museum in Berlin, and it said all art was modern at one time.
Right. Yeah. Of course it was.
but not to veer too far off. But I think the West is still here. There are still places you can go, but it's getting harder and harder to get away. And we don't want to get away. We want to have our GPS and we want to have our cell phone. And I think that the idea that you want to get away and be away is not is a foreign feeling now.
It really is. I have a group of friends and we get together on the 4th and we rent a house. And the first year we did it, our host told us, like, oh, just by the way, there's no Wi-Fi here. And then we found out the last day, of course, that there was Wi-Fi. But it was really just an attempt from her to kind of like, look, we're not here. We're here to be social. We're here to hang out and have a good time with each other. This is not someplace where we're going to go sit in the corner and look at our phones all day.
When we shot Kinderwald, we had very, very limited cell phone reception, and there was only internet in our base camp. We all lived out in the woods too. We rented an YMCA camp and lived in these tent cabins, and then shot on their land and on some state game land that we later discovered we didn't have permission to shoot on, but we did anyway. But we didn't have freedom. Yeah, and it was great because nobody could be fussing with their phone or, you were really out there and we were interdependent. Yeah. And I think that I found that so romantic as a child in a film like Lonely Are the Brave. The idea that it is just you and the land and your wits. Right. And I think more than anything, that what I brought forward in my life from a film like Lonely Are the Brave is the idea that you want to be free to explore. You want to be free to test yourself, to see what you're made of, to live by your own wits. Right. And the elements in Kinderwald that have an echo to this are certainly that these people the characters in the film are living in the woods in the 1850s and very much have to live by their wits.
It's something we rarely have to do anymore.
Yeah, and do we lose that part of our brain? I don't know.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. I've got to the point, I've got this GPS thing on my phone that like tells you where the traffic is, so I use it all the time now.
Is it Waze?
Yeah. I love it, and I use it all the time, and it's like I've avoided a lot of traffic with it, but now it's to the point where it's like if I'm at my friend's house, it tells me the same route to go every single time now, because it's like if I go to my friend's house, it tells me this is the way to go home, and I know that, but I still use it because I want to see if there's any traffic jams. But I do wonder, like, am I going to lose that part of my brain because I'm using this stupid thing?
You know what you'll lose? You'll lose the adventures that happen when you get lost. I use GPS.
Yeah.
I have my iPhone, I have Waze, I have Google Maps, and when Frank and I travel, Frank Bruckner, the lead actor and co-writer, when we drive, he doesn't have an iPhone. He goes by a map, a paper map.
Yeah.
And very often, if I don't use my device, we get lost, but we discover amazing things and amazing places, and the element of surprise and adventure and discovery, we protect ourselves from those things.
Yeah, but I'll say this too. It's like I've found a couple of times where I've ended up going through neighborhoods because of ways that I'd never been through before. It's like, where am I? This place is great. I got to come back and check this restaurant out. And so I think there's pros and cons to both sides of that, but you're absolutely right. I do wonder. It's like if it's just part of like your brain is just going to go like wither away. It's like, oh, you used that thing. You didn't need that part anymore. So I allocated it to something else.
But a lot of that I think is that we don't need to remember things because we can just look them up. We can Google them. We can use GPS. We lose the ability to pull things up.
Right.
And it's such a great feeling when you go, oh, wait. Oh, I remember.
I know. Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's very weird that you actually
It's like
get
bench pressing more than you did
That's a great
10
way to
minutes
look at it.
earlier, but you don't. So I don't know. Are we going to atrophy?
Yeah. I feel like I am.
Yeah. We can tell ourselves, let's shut off our devices, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
We're about out of time, so...
It's been great talking to you about this film. I was really happy to have an opportunity to go back and look at some of the scenes again and think about it once more. And I really... It is available. You can...
It is. And you know whose fault that is?
No, tell me.
Spielberg.
Seriously?
Yeah, he apparently... I found this out. He was looking for a clip from this movie for a Kirk Douglas tribute for the Shoah Foundation, and he was like, wait, how come we can't find this movie anywhere? And he told the National Film Registry, like, this movie should be access to it should be available to people.
The only way that I own a copy now is I bought a copy with Spanish subtitles from a Spanish DVD seller.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't available, and
right.
I'm hoping that they'll do a digital restoration. It's just such a magnificent experience to watch that film.
I will say the last 30 minutes of that flick are harrowing.
Yeah.
It's really intense, and it's it's funny, the thing that kind of keeps coming up for me over and over when I talk to people is like making sure that your main character earns the film by the end of it, and this film. Absolutely. But
everything that you need to know, I'll say one more thing from a directorial standpoint, everything you need to understand about the ending is given to you in the first 5 minutes. Everything's set up. Mm-hmm. The ending is set up in the first 5 minutes.
Oh, I know. And I don't want to give away the ending.
No, but not at all. But you...
Yeah, I saw that coming and I was just like, oh.
It's completely earned.
Yep.
And I think that's something that, as a filmmaker, if you know from the very beginning where your film is headed, you can have confidence, about bringing your audience there.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for talking with us.
Thank you.
Where can people follow your endeavors?
I Twitter at Kinderwald, and you can read about the film at www.kinderwaldfilm.com.
Cool. Thank you. Once again, Kinderwald screens Thursday, May 29th at 9:30 p.m. and Friday, May 30th at 4 p.m. during the Seattle International Film Festival here at the Uptown Cinema. You can get tickets at the box office, or better yet, guarantee yourself a seat by visiting sif.net. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Scarecrow Video. To find Lonely Are the Brave and a gazillion other films you won't be able to find anywhere else, visit scarecrowvideo.com. And until next time, remember, it's never too late to start thinking about the past.